Not every Torino was built to break the sound barrier. Some could barely break the speed limit. When you hear Torino, you picture muscle. Big blocks, Cobra badges, shaker hoods, tire smoke curling off the rear quarters. But for every fire-breathing street killer Ford unleashed, there was another quietly rolling off the line with a bench seat, hubcaps, and a wheezing six-cylinder under the hood. These weren't the CCJs, not the Talladegas, not the thunderous 429 monsters built to dominate the drag strip. No, this is the other side of the Torino story. The commuter specials, the rental fleet fillers, the base models that looked the part but couldn't outrun a minivan. In this episode of Muscle Cars Revolution, we're dusting off the slowest of the slow, 9 forgotten Torinos that put the cruise in cruiser. They may wear muscle car badges, but these slugs got lapped by history. Top 1. 1971 Ford Torino 4-door sedan 250 i6. It had the body of a bruiser and the soul of a secretary. From the curb it looked like a full-sized menace. Sharp lines, long hood, muscle car stance. But once the light turned green, reality set in. With an anemic 6-cylinder under the hood, this Torino didn't launch. It loafed. It was built to move people, not pulse rates. The 1971 Ford Torino 4-door sedan had the presence of a true family heavyweight. Long hood, squared-off grille, sharp body lines. It looked like it could house a V8 and still have room for groceries. But under the hood of this full-sized shell was a motor more suited for lawn tractors. A 250 cubic inch inline-6, producing just 145 horsepower and 223 pound-feet of torque. Paired with a 3-speed manual, or optional C4 automatic, it wheezed from 0 to 60 miles per hour in a painful 15.8 seconds, struggling to move its 3,600-pound curb weight with any urgency. Ford offered this base i6 not just to cut costs, but to win fleet and government contracts. That meant police departments, postal services, and local agencies were receiving Torinos that looked official but couldn't outrun a tired mail truck. Even with low gearing, the engine ran out of breath before the end of a freeway on-ramp. Worse, it was too big and heavy to handle like a compact, and too slow to qualify as a muscle car, or even a muscle cousin. Buyers lured by its bold design quickly discovered a driving experience filled with groans, not growls. With most consumers upgrading to the 302 or 351 V8, few i6 Torinos survived in the wild. Today, examples with the 250 i6 are rare, not because they're collectible, but because most were driven to death and forgotten. But just when you thought Ford couldn't go slower, 2 years later, they doubled down. Same engine, same layout, but somehow even more sluggish, and way less graceful. Top 2, 1973. Ford Torino 4-door sedan 250 i6. If the 71 felt slow, the 73 made it feel like a dragster. With new crash bumpers, added weight, and the same gutless i6, this was peak federal regulation frustration. It promised presence but delivered inertia. It looked like a cop car but ran like it had a donut in each cylinder. 2 years later, Ford brought back the 250 cubic inch inline-6 for its full-sized Torino sedan, this time stuffed into a heavier, bulkier, more federally regulated body. Thanks to new crash standards, reinforced bumpers, and added weight from emissions gear, the 1973 Torino 4-door sedan tipped the scales at nearly 3,900 pounds, a full 300 pounds heavier than the 71. Yet Ford kept the exact same base power plant, 145 horsepower, 223 pound-feet, and no miracles. The result? A car that crawled from 0 to 60 in a groggy 17-plus seconds when equipped with the C4 automatic. By 73, gas prices were rising and insurance companies were cracking down on V8 premiums. So Ford kept pushing the i6 as an economy option for full-size buyers. Never mind that real-world MPG hovered in the low teens under load. The engine groaned under the weight of 4 passengers and couldn't climb grades without kicking down or losing momentum. Even worse, the sluggish drivetrain was wrapped in a fastback-style body that looked like it could race, but never did. With performance sacrificed and fuel economy barely improved, the 73 250 i6 sedan became the slowest of the breed. Most were used up by fleet customers or traded in before hitting 80,000 miles. Survivors today are rarely restored because, frankly, nobody's chasing one down. But at least the four-door had an excuse: weight, utility, and budget buyers. The next Torino? A two-door coupe that promised muscle and delivered disappointment. Top 3. 1970 Ford Torino two-door hardtop 250 i6. It had the silhouette of a street fighter, but the heart of a taxicab. The fastback roofline, wide track, and Coke bottle curves whispered performance. But behind that grille, a six-cylinder wheeze barely good enough for a Pinto. From a distance, you saw a Cobra jet. Up close, you got left in the dust by station wagons. In 1970, Ford redesigned the Torino with sharp lines, a fastback roofline, and aggressive grille options. On paper, the two-door hardtop version looked like a legit muscle contender, but under that long, sculptured hood was a power plant better suited for compact sedans. The 250 cubic inch inline six, delivering a meager 145 horsepower and 223 pound-feet of torque. While buyers drooled over Cobra jets and 429 Thunder jets, this version was built for one thing: cost savings. Paired with a 3-speed manual or C4 automatic, the 250 i6 couldn't hustle its 3,500-pound body with any authority. Acceleration? A glacial 16.5 seconds to 60 miles per hour. Most who saw it assumed V8 power lurked beneath the hood. The dual headlamps, long doors, and low-slung profile screamed performance. But once the light turned green, it all fell apart. The engine moaned, the suspension sagged, and the car took its sweet time catching up to modern traffic. Worse, the i6 lacked the rumble, the swagger, and the torque that made Torinos iconic. These 250 i6 coupes were often sold to buyers who cared more about appearance than performance. But the mismatch was too obvious. Most were traded in or junked by the late 70s. Today, finding one with the original six-cylinder is almost impossible, not because collectors are hunting them, but because nobody saved them. Still, at least this one had the looks. The next Torino trading style for plush and added even more weight. What you got was a Brougham, with a time delay. Top 4. 1974 Ford Gran Torino Brougham two-door. This wasn't a car, it was a recliner on wheels. Ford loaded it with luxury trimmings, velour seats, opera windows, and forgot the horsepower. It oozed elegance, floated like a cloud, and accelerated like a couch being pushed uphill. The Brougham wanted to be a Thunderbird. It ended up as a boat anchor with chrome. By 1974, the Torino nameplate had shifted fully into personal luxury territory, especially in its top-trim Gran Torino Brougham. This two-door land yacht came with vinyl roofs, opera windows, extra chrome, and plush velour interiors. Everything except speed. Even when ordered with a V8, the power was sapped by smog controls and weight. And this one often came equipped with the 302 or base 351, but even those struggled under the car's nearly 4,100-pound curb weight. Buyers wanted quiet rides, not quarter-mile times, and Ford delivered. Something painfully quiet. The problem wasn't just the engine, it was the entire package. The C6 automatic was lazy, the rear axle ratios were tall for cruising, and the suspension was tuned for pillow-soft float, not traction. As a result, even with a 302 or 351W, the Gran Torino Brougham two-door lumbered from 0 to 60 in over 16 seconds. It cornered like a barge and braked like it meant well. It sold well to retirees, executives, and anyone who missed the Thunderbird's glory days. But on the street, the Brougham became the punchline of its muscle-bound cousins. Few were optioned with anything more potent than the base V8, and most lived quiet lives in carports and slow lanes. Today, they're rarely restored and barely remembered, except as a warning that bigger doesn't mean faster. But if the Brougham floated like a sofa, the next Torino made it worse, stretching the roof, shrinking the power, and saddling a wagon with the weight of its own ambitions. Top 5. 1974 Ford Torino Squire Wagon 302 V8. A suburban samurai, wielding a butter knife. The wood grain screamed family adventure. The 302 V8 whispered surrender. Weighed down by 3 rows of seats, roof racks, and bad decisions, the Squire moved like it had groceries in every cylinder. It looked ready to haul, but only in the emotional sense. The 1974 Torino Squire wagon looked like a suburban dream. Vinyl wood grain siding, chrome roof rack, rear-facing third-row seat. It was the kind of car that could haul the family, the dog, and a month's worth of groceries slowly very slowly. Under the hood was the base 3.2 cubic inch V8, producing a modest 140 horsepower thanks to low compression and emission controls. Paired with a C4 automatic transmission and a weight tipping over 4,300 pounds, this wagon wasn't just slow, it redefined the word. While the wagon looked like it could muscle through long trips and highway merges, it rarely delivered. Ford offered bigger engines, 351, 400, and even 460, but many Squires were sold with the base 302 to appeal to economy-conscious buyers. The result? A full-size station wagon that took over 18 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. Loaded with passengers, it needed a calendar, not a stopwatch. Even downhill, it struggled to keep pace with traffic. Despite its sluggishness, the Squire sold well to families across America. But time wasn't kind to these cars. Most were overworked, underpowered, and undermaintained. Few survived the scrapyards, and fewer still exist with the original drivetrain. Today, the 302-pounded Squire wagon is more novelty than nostalgia, an ironic collector's piece rather than a performance classic. But as slow as the Squire was, the next Torino on our list ditched the wood, kept the weight, and relied on a bigger engine that somehow didn't make it much faster. Top 6. 1975 Ford Gran Torino Base 351W. It had a V8 badge, dual exhaust dreams, and none of the fire. Choked by smog laws and buried under 4,000 pounds of malaise, this Torino wheezed out more disappointment than torque. It looked serious. It wasn't. You stepped on the gas, and it politely considered your request, then ignored it. By 1975, the Gran Torino had become a shadow of its muscle car past. The base model sedan was now a bloated, underpowered holdover from better days. Under the hood sat the 351 Windsor V8, once a respectable engine, but by 75, emissions regulations, catalytic converters, and low compression tuning had strangled it down to just 152 horsepower. With a C4 automatic transmission, soft suspension, and over 4,200 pounds of curb weight, the Gran Torino base was V8 in badge only. Buyers expecting V8 performance were in for a rude awakening. The 75 Gran Torino took over 17 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour, slower than some earlier inline-six models. Even more frustrating was how numb the car felt under load. Throttle response was sluggish, passing power nearly non-existent, and fuel economy hovered in the single digits. It looked substantial, but any sense of authority disappeared the moment you hit the gas. The 351W version was marketed as affordable V8 comfort, but it delivered neither thrills nor efficiency. Many were sold as company fleet cars or daily drivers for aging boomers, not enthusiasts. Today, survivors are rare, not because they're collectible, but because nobody bothered saving them. Unless it starred in Starsky and Hutch, a 75 Gran Torino base is almost invisible in classic car culture. Still, the sedan had its excuses. But the next Torino on this list? A long-roof wagon that looked purposeful and moved like it was towing an anchor. Top 7. 1972 Ford Torino Wagon 351 2V, base. All the room in the world and nowhere fast to go. With a two-barrel 351 under the hood and 4,300 pounds dragging it down, this wagon was a masterclass in overpromising. It could carry everything you owned, except momentum. Moms loved it, mechanics pitied it, kids prayed it wouldn't stall in the school pickup line. The 1972 Ford Torino wagon offered American families 3 rows, loads of cargo room, and the illusion of performance. Why? Because under the hood sat a 351 cubic inch V8, but not the high-speed Cleveland, or the fire-breathing 4-barrel version. No, this was the 351 2V, a low-compression 2-barrel carb variant, producing just 153 horsepower. Mated to a C4 automatic and saddled with a 4,300-plus lb curb weight, this wagon was all show, no go. On paper, it seemed like a good compromise between power and economy. In real life, it was slower than some 6-cylinders. Despite having a V8 badge, the 2-barrel 351 was tuned for emissions and smoothness, not acceleration. The car took over 17 seconds to crawl from 0 to 60 miles per hour. And it didn't stop there. With tall highway gears and soft suspension, the wagon floated through corners and lunged forward only when begged. Even fully loaded, it didn't feel planted. It felt winded. Many of these wagons ended up in school pickup lines, campground roads, and long summer trips, always behind schedule. Very few buyers ordered them with optional dual exhaust or performance gearing. As a result, most of these cars disappeared into obscurity, either rusted out or crushed without ceremony. You won't find many survivors at car shows, and those that do survive often wear engine swaps under the hood. But while the wagon made no promises, the next Torino pretended to be a muscle coupe, with a fastback look and base 302 V8 that moved like it had 4 flat tires. Top 8, 1973, Ford Torino base, 302 V8, 2-door coupe. It looked ready to brawl. Wide hips, low roof, and a grille full of attitude. But when the light changed, it hesitated. The 302 V8 was neutered, the gears were lazy, and the thrill? MIA. It was like meeting a boxer who forgot his gloves. All bark, no burnout. The 1973 Torino 2-door coupe was built on promise. Fastback silhouette, long hood, Coke bottle hips. It looked like it belonged in the lineup next to Cobra Jets and Starkey's Ride. But under the hood of the base model, just the 302 cubic inch Windsor V8, choked down to 137 horsepower thanks to smog restrictions and low compression, paired with a C4 automatic, open rear end, and a curb weight approaching 3,800 pounds, this car was all visual muscle with no real muscle to back it up. Buyers were lured by the aggressive body lines but often found themselves outrun by 4-cylinder imports. The 302 V8 that had once been lively now felt like it had a wet blanket thrown over it. Acceleration to 60 miles per hour took around 17.5 seconds, and passing power on the highway was non-existent. Even the growl of the V8 was muted, buried under emissions plumbing and tall highway gears. While thousands of these base coupes were sold to style-conscious drivers, few were loved. They looked mean, but drove meek. Many were modified or engine-swapped within a few years, while others were crushed after being mistaken for real Torinos and coming up short. Today, unmolested 302 base coupes are rare but not sought after. Still, the base coupe at least gave you flair. The final Torino on this list? Same platform, same power, but stripped of all attitude. Just a blank canvas with 4 wheels, a roof, and not a shred of urgency. Top 9, 1973 Ford Torino 2-door hardtop base. This was Torino on mute. No stripes, no roar, just sheet metal and disappointment. With the same wheezy 302 and none of the flair, it wasn't built for speed. It was built for volume sales. It had a muscle car body, but its spirit was already in retirement. The 1973 Torino base 2-door hardtop was what you got when you wanted the shape of a muscle car, but none of the substance. This was the entry-level coupe. Steel wheels, bench seats, column shifter, and a design stripped of flair. And under that long, sculpted hood, the same 302 cubic inch V8 found in the most basic sedans. Making just 137 horsepower, it was tasked with dragging nearly 3,800 pounds of body and frame around suburban streets, and it wasn't happy about it. The transmission? A soft shifting C4 automatic. Rear axle? Tall highway gears that made acceleration an afterthought. It looked like something that should move, but the base 2-door couldn't back it up. It lumbered from 0 to 60 in a lazy 18 seconds, slower than many 6-cylinder Mavericks of the time. While its fastback lines whispered performance, the driving experience screamed compromise. Ford's own marketing rarely showed this version in brochures. It was built to fill lots, not fuel dreams. This car wasn't hated. It was forgotten. Most ended up in the hands of first-time buyers or as trade-in fodder. Few survived the disco era with their original drivetrain intact. And, unlike GTs or Cobra clones, these base hardtops have little collector interest today unless modified. They're ghosts from the age of design over delivery. And that's where our list ends, not with a bang, but with a shrug. 9 Torinos that carried the name, wore the lines, but never earned the roar. Because sometimes the slowest muscle cars are the ones that never wanted to be muscle in the first place. There you have it. 9 Torinos that traded thunder for thrift. They weren't quarter-mile legends, and they sure didn't smoke any tires. But they still wore the Torino badge, shared that unmistakable silhouette and brought a quiet kind of cool to an era obsessed with speed. Not every car needs to be a burnout machine. Some of these models were daily drivers, family haulers, or fleet survivors, and today that makes them rare in their own right. What they lacked in horsepower, they made up for in quirky charm, oddball spec sheets, and the kind of vintage weirdness that turns heads at car meets today. So now we're asking you, if you had to choose one to daily, just for the looks or the nostalgia, which would it be? Drop your pick in the comments, and if you liked this ride, even if it took forever to get there, hit subscribe. Muscle Cars Revolution isn't just about speed. It's about the story.